on in the CFTD channel. Shall I post it on a general one?
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks for your attention, everybody. I just wanted to give you sort of a quick update on the project that I presented at the last meeting we had. Since we have a lot of new faces in the room, I just kind of wanted to tell you what my project was about. So I'm a lawyer. I used to be a consumer protection regulator, and now I cover consumer finance and consumer protection regulation. And so I had wanted to do a database that would be a deep dive on consumer complaint data from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a government agency that has over 1 million complaints in its database that are very rich in data on problems that people have with financial products and services. And if you've been following the headlines, you may know that this agency is very controversial now and is being headed by a Trump appointee, Mick Mulvaney, who's doing it as his second job and basically wants to sort of dismantle the agency slowly. So as the call for this project, I decided that I would sort of take a look at what Trump voters, or likely Trump voters, complain to the Consumer Financial Protection about. How a Trump appointee could, use the powers of the Bureau to better help the financial issues that affect Trump voters. So, with that, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So you actually work for the CFP?
No. They just have a very rich consumer complaint database that they make almost entirely public, down to zip code data, which is what I use to kind of help split the data into counties here.
And one of the proposals, sorry to interrupt, of the Trump administration is to get rid of that database.
Yeah. Which is ironic because probably a lot of people in the Western states are living off the line.
Yeah, this is very timely.
This is my medium. Yeah, you think so? So just to give you guys an idea of what I've done so far. The last time I was here, I presented a very rough version of a presentation that I had given when I did this project as the end of class project for my general assembly data analytics class. And now I have made a lot of updates to the presentation and format, sort of based on feedback that I've gotten from the group here about, what would be the best way to turn this into a public-facing project. So, for starters, I've got a Tableau public page, just kind of walking through a small number of visualizations, kind of breaking out the data. This is all based on consumer complaint data from 2016, which I've divided into counties, depending on whether they voted for Clinton or Trump. I made, sorry, waiting for Tableau to load here, a heat map of the most active counties, a comparison of how many complaints came from Clinton counties versus Trump counties, and how satisfied they were with the outcomes they got from the database. Comparison of the type of products that each type of county complained about, and a bit of a deeper dive into the complaints about debt collection, which demonstrated the biggest difference between counties where Clinton won and counties where Trump won. Thanks to the feedback I've gotten from this group, I then made this into a post on medium.com, which allowed me to incorporate some more narrative into the project. So just rather than kind of walking you guys through all the points right now, I'll just kind of show it to you so you can see how much it's progressed. And the links to the draft on medium.com and the Tableau public page will be up on the group's Slack channel. Yeah. So anyway, without giving you the whole presentation and eating up a bunch of time from our great speakers right now, I just wanted to give that update and tell you just a little bit about next steps. I think that the next thing, I got a lot of great ideas for other data that we could sort of bring into this data set on to sort of enrich it and see what other kind of factors the consumer complaint data correlates with. I got the ideas of using census data on urban-rural designations. I got the ideas of public health designations, which is particularly great because one of the interesting issues where there was a difference was debt collection for medical debt. But before I do that, first what I want to do is just kind of bring in the entire consumer complaint data set that has over 1 million complaints. This just uses the complaint data from 2016, which has about 100,000. It was mostly because I had the cheapest MacBook and I didn't want to set my processor on fire. But now that we can kind of host the data on data.world and to Tableau that way, it should work a lot smoother and give us a much more comprehensive look at the data. And once we've brought in the data from all the years the Bureau's been in existence, we can then start folding in public health and other things like that. So yeah, that's kind of the update. Next steps. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you considered using R-Shiny for some of your individual states?
I don't even know what R-Shiny is.
Because I see. So you said you using Tableau. It's like R-Shiny is more like a web-based sort of has some dashboard features, and it also could I guess kind of replicate some of the stuff that you're doing with Tableau. Well, I just invite you to check out Shiny.
Yeah,
because it's free.
Yeah, it would probably take me a bit of a learning curve to get it fully replicated there, but it would be nice to find the means where I could kind of break it out of Tableau, because using Tableau public, since I don't have the fully paid licensed version, definitely causes some headaches. So moving to something free and open would be nice.
Do you guys have any recommendations? Quick learning curve alternative to Tableau, open source for?
You got the link up to the Tableau page on the Medium story as well.
What's that?
So you have the Tableau dashboard and you have the link to it in the story as well. Because those are all screenshots, right? Because you can't embed Tableau
exactly
or deep libraries into Medium.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that hosted on the data journalist?
Yeah. So the idea is the journalist narrative part will be on Medium, where we have an organization and prediction, and then the data on data.world. And so the Tableau link should be on both.
And from our discussions earlier, it sounded like it was maybe possible to sort of integrate some of the Tableau visualizations on Data World. Is that right? Was that right? Okay, so it might be good to replicate it there too. Yeah, go ahead.
When you were first looking at the data and just analyzing it to see what the possibilities were for writing this, putting together the maps, did you find any limitations with how much data you could retrieve or use, or any limitations with the tools like Tableau Public?
Since I first made this with the fully licensed version of Tableau, which I had access to during my class, so that was helpful. I think the main limitation was just my sophistication as a Tableau user. I think the data itself is fairly rich. One of the really amazing things about this is that they give you all the way down to the 5-digit zip. So you can pinpoint where every complaint came from with a fair amount of precision. I think the real thing that I think I need to learn more about to sort of continue my research is just understanding the statistical significance in differences between the two bodies of complaints, because you're still talking about numbers in the tens of thousands of data points, but I'm kind of statistically illiterate, so I couldn't tell you what the what the actual significance is still. Yeah, go ahead.
What's your threshold for determining someone is likely to trust voter based on the zip code? Is it a zip code has 90% red support, 80%?
So that's one thing that we haven't actually worked in yet. Basically, I just moved zip into county and then used county level election data.
Yeah.
If you sort of take into account trends about how politically concentrated and isolated different parties have become. I think you can say that it serves pretty well as a rough proxy, but that would be a good next step to sort of look into.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to that one because I don't have any suggestions for like news storylines because I just don't know the story about this or the data that well. There is a story that the Pudding did. It's another data visualization like website called "Why the Republican Party Wins When Robots Take Your Job," which has a little bit more like in-depth like breakdown as like voting percentage and data that's categorized kind of like this. So it's really just an idea to flesh out this data more, not necessarily like a different story. So
do you want to drop it in the Slack channel?
Yeah, I'm gonna drop it in.
You say that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called pudding.cool.
If you're not on the Slack, I'll send you an invitation. If you're not on the Slack, I'll send you an invitation. You're on the Meetup, but the Meetup has a link to connect to the Slack if you want to give it a try. And then we will drop the information on the Slack if you wish to try. We're using that as, but I can keep you updated by email as well.
You don't know is our shiny based on card?
Yes.
Yeah.
Alternative analysis. Okay, so that's really hard. So if you don't just like
Right. Quick site. Quick site, sorry. You know, it's like I will send you. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
D3 is very hard.
D3 you have to learn. Is that in? Yeah, but I think Tableau, Tableau was easy to learn, but for D3 and all the other as a non-coder, the learning curve was scary. Quick site will be right. Right.
Spend time learning the D3s of the world, right?
Yeah.
But if you want something that's like Tableau but free, QuickSight is
Perfect.
or
Yeah.
is an answer.
That's probably
Plotly, yeah.
Plotly. Okay.
Plotly.
But Plotly you need to install on the. You need to do an install on
Or is
your.
that just a standalone?
It's a Python library.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to know.
See, that I can work with because
Perfect.
I took the Knight Foundation Python class, so got some
It's
base
plot.li.
knowledge.
Well, then there's Seaborn too.
I'm gonna have to write all this.
Take notes. And there's,
Yeah. Okay.
and there's a channel.
You can do Python, you can also just get GDAL. GDAL.
I think we also have a
Do you want
presentation on
notepad?
visualization.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Anything
Any
else to
data.
ask the group?
Yeah. What's that?
Anything else?
No, that's it. Did anyone else have any other questions? I'll just get.
So when you join the Slack, there is a channel just for each project, and there's one CFPB. You guys, if you want to share and find those resources, that's really great. Thank you.
I had one more question.
Yeah, I was interested with the heat map. Okay, it is per capita. Yeah, I was wondering if knowing where the most complaints are coming from tells us anymore. Because it doesn't look like it's specifically toward population areas. I noticed that there is a bigger distribution, like, for example, among the western states there.
You've kind of opened up the biggest can of worms in terms of.
Sorry.
No worries. I mean, that's probably why you asked about it, because it's one of the most interesting things. When you work with numbers that are relatively small per capita, you get some weird anomalies. Like some of these western states or counties are ones where, Pershing County, Nevada had 4 records, but it only has a median it only has a population of 6,700 people, which kind of puts it at the top of the heat map. So I'm hoping that as the sort of quick and dirty way that I dealt with this for the purposes of this was basically squaring the numbers of complaints to exaggerate differences. It's something you do in certain like antitrust analysis techniques, but you guys don't want to learn about that. Yeah, but it exaggerates differences and helps generate a smoother curve. What I'm hoping to do is, as we bring in that 1 million complaint database, that will kind of help even things out a bit more. Yeah.
Based on one graph you showed, it seemed like blue states almost like double the number of complaints, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because red states don't like the Consumer Financial Protection Group as government, so they'll use it less that way.
Yeah, I've seen some articles, kind of positing various theories for this. There could be better publicity. There could be sort of more faith in the government to bring positive outcomes. There's a lot of things that could be.
Are there agencies that facilitate these as well? Like these types of complaints, is there like a place people go to and they're able to like voices these? I don't know if that's something that happens or not.
Wait, so sorry, what's that?
Like, so in more like urban areas, I don't know if there's like agencies that help people with these complaints, or if like there's like a physical place people go to and have complaints, and they end up facilitating these types of things. I don't know if that's.
I think the more that you're plugged into both like governmental and non-governmental, support networks for your problems. Like if people are going to legal aid clinics, you can tell them about these resources, or they're more likely to complain to a state attorney general because they're more aware of that.
Yeah,
that seems like we correlate.
I was curious if like just networks were a big part of it. They wouldn't be as big, obviously, in rural areas or in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a compelling explanation. I just don't, it's I don't have any proof for it yet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Well, thanks for your questions, everybody. I appreciate your time.
And if you want to engage with the offline with Ben, again, is leading the channel on Slack called CFPB. So, and we can continue.
Just have Twitter, right?
Yes. Yep. Great. Yeah, and I'll talk to you guys who had all the great suggestions after this to make sure I got all of them down.
Introduce.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
And our next presenter is Natalie, graduate also from the GA Data Science Immersive.
Yep. The sixth iteration. Right. Hopefully it saves my screening thing. I don't think it works like that though, so. What? Okay. So, I'm going to go through a brief introduction of myself, a brief background of the issue, so you know what I'm talking about. I actually entered this as part of the blogging competition hosted by General Assembly and Shout. So I'll talk about the data used, because as a journalist, I imagine you'd be interested. The model I use and the conclusion. So the model gets pretty heavy data science, and I'm going to walk through how to interpret partial dependence graphs, but I think we can all do it, so that'll be fun. So I'm Natalie Olivo. I majored in actuarial science. I have experience in management consulting. Now I'm an actuarial contractor, but I'm looking for data science roles. So this was supposed to be an emoji of the brunette girl raising her hand. The topic I'm here to discuss today is humanitarian aid and whose dollars are most effective. And this is said with the context that the Trump administration has reinstated the global gag rule, and I want to say the global gag rule plus because it now extends to any organization that counsels abortion, and they've taken a few extra steps to make sure that funding does not go toward these organizations in any international humanitarian aid context either. So the defunding of the United Nations Family Planning and Maternal Health Organization, which is UNFPA, and Pence has announced intention to channel U.S. aid dollars through faith-based groups, Christian organizations in particular. So that's where we are. So now all this was done against the backdrop of the refugee crisis. I took this graph from the Pew Research Center, and right now 1 in 100 people on this earth are displaced. And over 75% of these refugees are said to be women and children. So, and more than half of the world's estimated 800 daily maternal deaths occur in humanitarian, in the refugee camps. So, the refugee crisis is often a sexual violence crisis in situations where people are having conflicts of cultures. This is a graph taken from the Atlantic article written by the director of Women Under Siege. And this is just kind of a breakout. If you can't read it, it says, it's the reports of sexualized violence in Syria over a 2-year span. We have multiple attackers, rape, groping, sexual assault without penetration, for sexualized violence, and situation, and additional consequences, with the red bars being women victims and the blue bars being men victims. So anytime there's a refugee crisis, there's a lot of sexual violence as well.
A question: is that chart within the Syria, the area that was occupied by ISIS, or is that Syria that's controlled by the government?
So it's
probably the full country, and when people start moving from one.
Not sure, to be honest. What were you saying, Pat?
If it's Syria, it's probably the entire country, and
yeah,
and people are moving from one territory to the other.
The ISIS controlled the government.
So the tidbit that I took from this story says they've broken down 162 stories gathered from the onset of the conflict in March 2011.
Oh.
Which is 226 separate pieces of data. All reports are currently marked unverified because you've not been able to independently confirm them. So that's kind of the background I have on here. This was not in my BA. I got it from the Atlantic article authored by the director of Women Under Siege. So how do you measure effectiveness? Back to humanitarian aid and how far it goes. So in work done by me, I measured it by using women's completion of upper secondary education. And the reason why I use this is because it's a proven indicator of state security and peace, and it's a good proxy for knowing the quality of life and what it's like to be an innocent civilian in a particular area. So the data that I used were the data that I found particularly interesting were USAID, UNAID, USAID toward women's equality, and UNAID toward women's equality. Other things that I used as part of my model to indicate the context in which these variables were in place were population, GDP growth, GDP per capita, polity, which is a measure of democraticness and commonly used in these social science studies, and durable, which is another item used by the World Bank and studies similar to this one, which is time since last regime change. And you might be wondering what USAID toward women's equality and UNAID toward women's equality. I feature engineered these to include reproductive health care, STD control, including HIV/AIDS, family planning, women in development, women's equality organizations and institutions, health, combination of general, basic, and population, policy, reproductive purposes, population policies, programs, and reproductive health, combinations of activities. So these were all, if you were to open up my data, this is what they were called in the aid database by William and Mary, a research lab. And so these I just partitioned out to toward women's equality. So I use a gradient boosting regressor. And if you can't read this, don't worry, I will get into it in the next slide. The reason why I used this model is because it doesn't rely on any underlying distributions of the data. It's agnostic of relationships that may exist in between variables. So like collinearity doesn't throw it off. And it's boosted to statistically minimize error. So this is to kind of get rid of like the high bias, low variance instance that is prone to, that models like these are prone to. And now to here, this is a feature importance graph. So something important here, this is not indicating linear relationships. This, it doesn't indicate causal, and what it is that given random noise added to a particular variable, how much does it impact the output variable? So this is how important that feature is to determining women's completion of secondary education. We see that, as you would expect, GDP per capita and population are huge. If you're a huge poor country, chances are there's going to be lower women completing secondary education. So this provides us some insight, but leaves much to be desired. So good thing there's partial dependence plots. So the interpretation here is, so we see that like US aid toward women's equality is right up there with UN aid. Just because it's high up there, this is an important point. Just because it's high up there doesn't necessarily mean that more US aid means more women completing secondary education. It's just because it's really high impactful. I mean, we would like to assume any aid given has a positive impact, but we'll see later that maybe aid causes a negative impact. This slide's a little out of place. But so here's the partial dependence graph. And this, while holding all other variables at its mean, it increases one variable at a time. And it has its partial dependence and shows its impact on the outcome variable. So rich countries send more of their women through secondary education. So this GDP per capita, as it increases, so, and this is the y-axis, is percent change in the outcome variable. So as GDP per capita increases, this steadily climbs. That's intuitive, right? So we're going to move on to the next one, and it walks through that. So UN versus US aid. These flat relationships can indicate a rather dichotomous relationship. So if they're receiving aid, it's affected this much. So this starts at like a 0.05 for the UN aid. So positive 0.05 of percentage of women completing secondary education. And this one kind of starts at like negative 0.05 for US aid. Kind of makes its way up. That's good. Yes. Okay, sorry. And then following UN versus US aid toward women's equality. So, like I said, these flat bar lines kind of indicate dichotomous. If they're receiving aid, it's impacted by this much. The UN aid toward women's equality starts all the way at 20%. So that's great. We see that if you are getting very high amounts of aid from the UN toward women's equality, you must be in a very dire situation. So it kind of trails off. US aid toward women's equality kind of starts right below the 0 mark. It's flat and kind of has one of these. So an important thing about these graphs is that they're very good at indicating trends. These crevices could be kind of outliers in the data. So these are like sensitive items. They're really more good for interpreting, like, is it an upward trend? Is it a downward trend? Is it like a dichotomous relationship? And then beyond that, you need to go into your data and examine a little further. I can't explain these, is what I'm saying. Then our model, what we can gather here is that our model disproves the Trump administration's claims that UN dollars are ineffective or inefficient. And channeling United States humanitarian aid efforts through Christian organizations, as the Trump administration has voiced intention to do, would drive cultural tensions in other countries. And given how much of a budget the United States puts toward these causes in relation, so the United Nations is the blue, and they're here. The United States is the orange, and then the UN and US toward women's aid are red and green, which you can hardly see. And this is just countries in the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia?
I'm sure they would probably accept no aid.
It's possible that, so since I was using women's completion of secondary education, if there was no metric for that, it was dropped.
It's probably not the Gulf countries who have the oil, right? I mean, these are countries that you can say they need some budget support, and you don't have the Gulf countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia who are they receive American weapons. They don't receive the American aid. And most of these countries are actually unstable or have governance issues that requires humanitarian interventions.
Oh, no worries. That was a really good question, and thank you, Flavius, because you're an expert at this.
Not at all.
So yeah, given how much we budget toward aid and how we want to withhold money from UN, be even higher. And given how effective they are toward improving the lives of innocent civilians, and the proxy that we used to examine that was women's completion of upper secondary education, it might not be the best decision to do that. So that is what my conclusion is. So if you have any questions, this presentation was made entirely possible thanks to Flavius for hosting the blogging competition, lighting the fire under me to get this done. Professor Sarah E. Parkinson at Johns Hopkins University,
nice.
And Evan Smith for helping me find data sets that were rich.
Let me ask one question, please. On the slide where you showed the partial dependency and the, I think UN where you would say the money, I think it's the one, is it the one? Yep. The money from UN aid or US aid, they are reflected in per capita or in the absolute numbers?
So this is this would be a scaling of absolute numbers. I like what I got from these is that you could see the difference. Like this one starts at 15 and this one starts at 12. So, and which aligns with our graph. So these are just absolute, they're not per capita. And yeah, so.
Sorry, being completely ignorant on data, based on the calculation that you run, it's safe to say that a policy conclusion or recommendation would be just don't do that. Don't switch the aid from UN to US Christian charities. Is that because of efficiency of the dollars?
The USAID and the UN have different motivations with their money. That's why these might look so different. The USAID, their goal is to improve US standing in foreign countries. They want to brand everything they do. I have this picture that is a school. This is a picture at a refugee camp school and a gift of the United States government. USAID dollars are given to improve like U.S. standing in the hearts and minds. This is complicated because USAID has also been involved in controversial stuff. Like the discovery of Osama bin Laden because CIA operatives were working with USAID polio vaccine. So there are actually some local governments that forbid locals from using USAID aid. So this gets like very complex very quickly. And then UN aid is like just providing aid, and it aims to be apolitical. Like it's just people are dying or in crisis, like we need to help them. So I'm not an expert at what I just said to you. This was what I found in my research, and I have great resources linked on my Medium article, but to speak more on it is beyond my expertise.
Next question. So do you think that it would enrich your project to study across different years? I mean, obviously our aid to the UN and our aid to various countries across the world varies over different years. And if we were able to smooth that out and take a look at, the comparative contributions that we made to the UN versus our own USAID in different years, do you think that would strengthen? What would you expect to see in your graphs if you had the time to be able to do that?
I would expect to see, so the UN Family Planning Organization that I mentioned, the US in the past has been responsible for about 10% of their budget, which is phenomenal. And so to have that absence is very detrimental. I would say to examine it, the global gag rule actually has a history. It started with Reagan. And every Republican president has reinstated it, and every Democratic one has rescinded it. And so it would be very interesting to examine like kind of every other 4 years since Reagan. I use data from 2003 to 2013. So kind of like a half mix of Obama and then not. So, and
did you slice it out?
No, I didn't slice it. Yeah, I just I did it all together. So, and it looks like you had something to contribute there.
No, just a brief question. Is the global gag rule the same thing that I've heard referred to in the media as the Mexico City rule?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is what it is.
How far does this data go back?
This data goes back quite far, but I wanted to limit it to kind of recency, so I just used 10 years. Yeah. 2013 was the latest year that I found complete data because I used a lagging methodology, which I describe in my blog, so that I know that population causes so that have the population from the prior year and the aid from the prior year causing the current year situation. So because of this lagging methodology and that we don't have 2015 data for the education metric, that kind of cut me a year off and toward the end.
Okay, but it does go.
Yeah, it goes way back. You could totally analyze it. Every Republican and Democratic president since Reagan.
Fantastic. Okay.
I'm pretty ignorant of data, but I would like to know more about how you establish causations instead of just correlation. Like when you say population causes, like when you have the graph, how different factors resulted in percentage. So like how did you establish the causation? And the same goes with the dichotomy where you have like the absolute numbers of absolute amount of contributions by UN and USAID and the impacts they have done on women's attainment of secondary education.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you think that's that's a causation as well? Or is that a correlation?
I think it's a relationship that can be simplified with partial dependence plots. However, partial dependence plot is like one variable with the other. To capture how the variables interact with each other, you can use this gradient boosting regressor. However, it's harder to interpret. So here I show these stars, and back to your first question about causation. Yeah. These stars are how much I lagged things by. So like if they had a democraticness measure of it's a scale that goes from -10 to 10, one being like a complete democracy and one being a complete authoritarianism. And so I lagged this by 2 years, marked by the double asterisk. And I did the same with year since last regime change because I wanted to see kind of how these to measure them all at the same time and not kind of do like this time series lagging wouldn't be as effective as if you give it a chance to lead to one thing to another. So I lagged these by 2 years, GDP, USD, 2 years. And then I lagged other items like aid by 1 year. So with the idea that if GDP and regime change just if GDP was, low and year since last regime change was like 1, that might be like a causation for for more aid to come, if that makes sense. So that's why I like some of them 2 years and some of them 1 year. So kind of, and that actually made a much more accurate model. It went from I always hesitate to say accuracy scores of models because what does it mean? And I don't want to go into the complexities, but it went from a 60% to around 80%. So it improved by adding this lag. But like I said, take the accuracy score very you wouldn't publish that in an article.
So just to understand it better, so you are able to establish causation using a model called the partial dependency model with the booster regression?
Yes. I want to say that it describes kind of how relations can act together because it's not necessarily linear. We didn't, not once today did we say more dollars in aid cause more this. We saw it trends. Right? So it's hard to these because people are so used to linear relationships, and so having things where all of these would affect your outcome variable at once, it's really hard to and how aid and GDP kind of the higher your GDP might mean lower aid for you, and how that impacts your outcome variable of education. It's very hard to create linear relationships, is what I'm saying. And if there are really great statistical journalism pieces, I would hesitate before publishing a journalism piece with this model, to be honest, just because it isn't the linear regression that people are used to. This causes this. So
if you look in the political economy, scientific literature or political science.
Yeah, I need to come to you.
Academic.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend going to a computational social science journal with this and not a news.
Right.
Sorry. I'm not well versed in statistics, but I think is what you're trying to say with this type of analysis is ignoring if they correlate or if they basically if you had done X so many years sooner, you would have reached the same results 2 years sooner as well. So if you change the variable one, they change the thing, even if it's not progressing linearly. If X had done, if the original trend was if X is here, the other outcome is here. If you had moved that back 1 year or 2 years, you would have gotten that same type of outcome, I guess.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you said earlier if GDP affects maybe X variable negatively, right?
Yeah. So the higher the GDP, maybe it gets less aid.
Yeah. So if that GDP level had been 2 years earlier, you would have met that same negative aid 2 years earlier in the chart.
I'm not saying that it would cause negative aid.
But you'd be in the same region. Maybe.
So
it would be strongly correlated to the factor that you're trying to explain. So just sometimes shifting a certain explainer may fit better into the model in terms of better higher level of correlation between the variables, and that's why you would also want to see if there is any assistance provided to a country it might have had a cumulative effect. So not necessarily go into the same year and have an impact, but lag behind 1 year, depending on the situation and how decisions are made in an international argument.
But I just wanted to add, correlation doesn't always mean causation.
Yeah.
That's a plug.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
This changes everything. Are the lag variables, are they being associated with the level of secondary education or with the change in the level of secondary education?
Level.
So with the level.
Yeah.
Oh, since you said that the United States uses aid as like a public relations thing, did you research like which countries based on strategic location or natural resources?
Good luck with
high
that.
amounts of aid? Because I would imagine places where we want to influence, we want aid to. We don't really care about people, but we want to look good in their eyes. It'd be like a nice number to see.
That would be.
A PhD dissertation.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So my aid expert that I spoke to was Sarah, and she gave me what I needed to do to measure like the effectiveness and how I wanted to look at it. She seemed to know a lot, but her biggest qualm was, or like kind of relayed to me, was that in a lot of these areas that are very important, like them are not. I don't want to frame it like that. Okay, so a lot of these areas have very sparse data because maybe their government is having a coup and they want to restrict all data exiting the country. So they will respond very harshly with imprisonment and maybe other consequences if you try to track data on certain measures.
Why do you want to know how many women graduate secondary school?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
There's some good proxies, I feel, in the field.
She's written, she's literally written papers and books on how this can be very hard to model using data. So I did the best I could. And she says that while many fields are moving toward, I don't want to say she exactly said this, but she's saying that the qualitative value of the research here is still very high, even when a lot of fields are kind of transitioning to communicating with data more and more, just because there is so much restriction around information flow from these countries in crisis sometimes.
Thank you.
Oh.
Please.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, whether or not there are natural resources in a particular country, is that going to affect how much a dollar gives a woman a chance to study?
Good point. I don't know.
I mean, if you're already controlling for GDP.
Yeah.
There's a measure called purchasing power for GDP, but I don't know. Andrew, maybe you are aware of that. Russia usually quotes that their GDP in terms of the purchasing power, rather than the convertible straight from dollar market to make it look better. This is one of the things that Nancy might have used. I don't know, in the future.
And there's a whole literature on natural resources. Paul Collier actually is the expert at Oxford that work on that, those correlation, the resource curse kind of literature. Yeah. And I think that's very courageous. It's more, as you were mentioning, academic paper than just a newspaper article. And I would run a search on Google Scholar for the statistical model. Plus political science, because you might find a lot of some pointers in the literature on international political economy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice job.
Going through.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm just trying to run over all the
That's
Or
actually
did you-
Evan's dissertation.
Oh, his signature?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Or your first
You were saying that you use that you squares and variables so that you can evaluate the differences. She was talking about how her partner is in this particular
The beers are here.
Spatial data.
Conventional wisdom, if you will, of the world is right. And I think it's hard to
Spatial
conventional
journalism
wisdom, you just pull it from your.
It's really like media.
Right.
So
It's not-
are you like
it's not something you discovered when you were
So it's like geographic. So in space, yeah, there's really, so like geographic data and other content.
That's been used. To
No, when you are.
So when you say space. So when we present this.
So the last presentation. So the last presentation by Joseph.
Joseph Nelson is used to be a lead instructor of data science at GA. Now you are
Starting a software company.
or
started.
Yeah, and is that representative? Yep. Yeah, representative is a wonderful company. They organize together with Deloitte, I think that's hackathons where
We did have an hackathon.
yeah, but that was a wonderful participation. But very active in data science, and our first instructor for data through visualizations is all Joseph Nelson. Please welcome.
Cool. What's up, everyone? Aim to be a bit more interactive, so no one is safe, especially if I know your name. I want to do a walkthrough of data visualization, okay? So the best practices. And after this, every single meetup, if anyone violates these practices, we'll talk about it. Maybe we'll get invited again, we'll see. But yeah, so who am I? That's me. Run a company called Represently, 4-person company that provides software product for digital grassroots activation. Basically, when organizations, say DACA, want a specific outcome, not only do their supporters know what's going on, but their supporters' networks probably knows what's going on. So we do network analysis to help organizations magnify their impact. From Des Moines, Iowa, my influences include Ben Horowitz, Rachel Thomas, Jeff Dean, and Andrew Ng. Quick fun fact about each of them, I suppose. Ben Horowitz, he's a tech investor at A16Z. Big thesis that software is democratizing access to anything. I'm a big believer, I think that's a good thing. Rachel Thomas, she runs fast.ai, creates a lot of free open source resources for learning. Jeff Dean, Jeff Dean is someone that he only has 2 keys on his keyboard, 0 and 1. He's one of the guys that made Hadoop at Google. And yeah, I mean, compilers don't warn Jeff Dean warns compilers. Andrew Ng is someone that co-founded Coursera. He also was the chief research scientist at Baidu, kind of Chinese Google, for lack of a better explanation, and currently is democratizing access to AI. He's credited with saying AI is the new electricity. I think that's super true. The thing I like most about him is not only is he advanced in the field of new research, but he's equally exceptionally poignant when explaining introductory concepts, which I think is to be emulated. I like hockey, software as a sales startups, bad data science puns, and bicycling. They used to be running, but I got a bike. Bike through the snow 2 days ago. Would not recommend. Fell on the ice. Both professionally, some stuff that I used to do. So yeah, I used to lead the data science instructor program for GA, like the full-time coding bootcamp of sorts for students. So some of my former students are here, and they better clap loudest. Before that, I did data engineering work on the Facebook UC team and trade analysis at USDA. some digital public affairs work at Fleishman Hillard, and went to DW and help out with their master data science program. Data is a superpower. I need to tell that to this group. This is a nice exponential plot that I made to visualize how much data there is. There's a lot. Doubles every 2 years, not as in exponentially. So every 2 years, you have twice as much. Data is valuable for 3 key reasons, at least. Volume, right? There's just the inordinate amount of it. Data is so big, huge. Validity, data is useful for convincing because people trust it. And for that same reason, you can be a bit misleading unless you use effective data visualization practices. So these tips maybe are, a skill can be used for good or evil. So hopefully we can have some good data ethics. Versatility. Everything can be quantified to some degree, even if that doesn't explain the full picture. It probably helps aid the picture, right? Count the number of times that something's happening, rank things. A lot of ways that data can help aid a conversation, even if not replace it. So that's important. So visual design. I want to start with actually looking at top examples and ask you all what you like about them, okay? And these are always my go-to examples, so I'm sorry if you've seen these before. I guess we'll lean on you for your expertise. The 2 examples that I have are non-coincidentally both from, non-coincidentally both from 538, okay? So I'm gonna show the first one, and I'm gonna introduce it a little bit, and then,
We didn't want to say anything about the elephant in the room, but
yeah. Nice. All right. So this is a visualization that 538, when it was owned by the New York Times, made to visualize the way that every state has performed in a presidential election since 1952. It's the way that they voted. And that's the full introduction I'm going to give. From here now, I'm just going to awkwardly move the mouse around. You are going to identify things that you like about this visualization, okay? So awkward silence begins now.
But it tells a history.
You clearly see the southern strategy of Nixon.
what are you highlighting?
I'm clicking these things over here.
First thing, okay.
Yeah.
So each individual strand is a state.
Helpful that they made them different thicknesses.
The thicknesses have meaning.
More polarized.
Just to distinguish them from one another.
Yeah.
So we get the gist, I think, generally, right? So when we add additional context, then you tell me what you like about it. This side more Republican, this side more Democratic, and you see the way that any state you highlight, you can see its margin and the way it voted from 2012 all the way back to 52, as stated at the beginning. So it is a lot of information in a small thing. What do we like about this? What do we like about this?
Interactive.
Interactive. Yeah, I like that too. Why is that? What about this interactivity is helpful?
Brings attention.
Okay, brings attention. What else? Yeah.
I like the contrast. It's very well visual and just easy to point out that
Can you explicitly what contrast
what
do you
the
like?
point they're trying to make when you have your cursor at a certain.
Yeah. So you like the fact that the highlighting, the sharp black on white, the
curve, yeah, you can easily just quick glance and kind of understand what's a priority to look at.
Awesome.
And also, it's very sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ladies first.
I mean, the whole layout is brilliant. It's just like
This picture.
a piece of art. Almost it's a picture, but it's a graph. The axis is right there. You know what I mean? So it's informative all the while, being engaging, interactive, and aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, and I agree with each of those adjectives, but I want to drill why. What makes it aesthetically pleasing? Let's start there. Yeah.
Part of the reason that I love maps in malls is because it tells you you are here, right? It can give you a place to understand from where are we talking about, right? So and not only does it label it with actual text and says, oh, this is where Obama was reelected, or this is where this other strategy was implemented. You can say what was happening in this place at this time, and then all of your own relative information can be, you can understand it from where you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nicole likes that it is. So for example, like if you happen to be fortunate enough to be from Iowa, you can go in, and see how Iowa's voted in every previous election. And that's sort of personalization and offered personalization to the point of interactivity allows you to sort of opt in and say, I want more information about this specific place. I agree. What else? Yeah.
Also, if you look at many times when I open Tableau visualization of the day, I'm just too confused to start. And here it's very straightforward. You close your eyes and you know it's political spectrum, and you have the Democrat, the Republican. You quickly be able to read the graph. Despite all the rich information, you can already get something from the graph, which is the polarization.
Yeah, so
in
it's
one.
Yeah, it's like maxim minimalist is what some people will say, which is like this idea that there's a minimal amount of information here. And this is what I want to say about interactivity being useful. It's not, the fact that it's interactive doesn't alone make it useful. The fact that the interactivity adds something. In this case, imagine that the margins of every single state was listed at the time of load. Just totally overwhelming. And so instead, the interactivity allows more information to be embedded in this thing without it overwhelming the user upon immediately looking at it. What else? So I mean, an adjective that Valerie used was engaging. What about it is engaging, perhaps? Or maybe you have some other comment. Go for it.
Well, I have a small observation. So
Yeah.
the thickness, you see the rectangles on Florida?
I do.
Is that based on the population of Florida?
What do we think?
I think so. Electoral votes.
Electoral votes, yeah. So loosely population, yeah. The electoral weight of a given state corresponds to its width.
Got it. So then it's divided by the states that they won.
That's right.
Got it. Okay.
Do you like that?
I didn't understand that until just
Okay,
now.
that's good.
I didn't know it was like Florida on this side and on this side
Got
until
it.
I just made that connection.
Got it. So it's not, it does require some looking around, I would agree. But the fact that the thickness corresponds to electoral weight is a good demonstration of the importance. The thesis of good visualization is using space effectively. Information. The width of its place, in this case, means something. It means that that place carries more electoral weight.
So if you scroll down, the Democratic and Republican ranges, they do. I like that the Democratic and Republican range is fixed to the top of the screen. So you never
Yes, very subtle.
But the states don't, and you don't have like a filter. So like if I wanted to look at Missouri, I couldn't just type in Missouri and have it highlighted and stick all the way down.
Yeah, so I think there's two things to address there. The first is that you like that this axis, it's very subtle, but this is an axis that follows you along the way. And notice how these lines here, the way that these are labeled, you don't notice unless you want to notice. You know what I mean? If you want to know a given state was greater than 20% in one direction or the other, you can figure that out by slowly looking at this dotted line. But if you didn't want to pay attention to that dotted line, it's like it's not even there, right? And I think that is a very powerful attribute to this visualization. The second comment you made is worth discussing too. This idea that
like if you wanted to follow the history of Missouri all the way from beginning to end, there's not a way to just stick to it. You have to find it over and over again.
Yes, and I think that was a deliberate editorial choice. So for example, the concern here is this isn't a database. I can't go in and type Missouri and see how Missouri's voted over time. Why do you think the editors made that decision? And here I don't know, I haven't spoken with Nate Silver and asked him about this, so it's just us making conjectures. But
just the amount of real estate available on the
amount of real estate available, perhaps?
Real Clear Politics does that.
Real Clear Politics does that?
So what is the purpose for when you care about a state? I think the purpose here is to show the relationship between states. I'm most interested in the states that you see make very big changes in contrast to other states that barely moved during the same differences between two elections.
I think that's why they did it too. So John says that the narrative of this piece isn't a database like Real Clear Politics as contrast, where you're meant to do a maybe utilitarian, very specific, wonky drill down of single places, but instead, if you were able to drill down in single places, this piece, instead of becoming an overall narrative of how things have trended over time, becomes a searchable database to go in and get specific info, which again could be helpful to the user, but that's not the point of this piece. And so let's pay attention to the title here. Over time, how states have shifted, or over the decades, excuse me. And this makes use of a technique, data journalism, called scrollytelling, where if you scroll through this story, you get more and more information. And I hate that term, but we're here.
I mean, the highlight New Jersey, like in California buttons, like
Yes.
for the left. I don't think we've seen
Can select 2 states to be part of.
Rather, there are pre-embedded narratives on the left. So this isn't a benefit of this visualization because let's say that you came to this thing and you had no idea what you wanted to look at. They've done that for you. They've done the homework. You can go in and be like, look, just switch in the South. California, New Jersey. They used to be consistently Republican. Now they're consistently Democrat. That's an interesting finding. And so, in other words, even if you had zero interest in picking out a single state or kind of constructing your own narrative, there's some already embedded there for you. And that's of great value. I think, for example, home state advantage, looking at Georgia, when Carter ran and seeing his home state advantage is huge. And that adds context. It says, in 1976, Jimmy Carter had one of the largest home state advantages in history. This advantage is one possible reason, this is from 2012, the Romney campaign hopes to capture Representative Paul D. Ryan's home state, Wisconsin, this year. So there's some context added in. You had a comment.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the thing I've appreciated most in this piece is not the fact that it's interactive, but the fact that it is a guided, it is like a carefully curated guided tour.
Yes.
Like, I really appreciate the sidebars and the way I interpreted this piece, including the fact that it does not have a searchable database like thing.
Yes.
We explore different states. Is that because they the creators want the audience to follow through. Like, they want the audience to read that.
I agree.
To read those little blocks of text, and like the visualization is more of a backup. Like, you see, we are not making this up. Like, this is very clear, and like the data really explains, and that's the purpose of this piece, and I really appreciate that.
It took me like forever to realize this, but we've all seen so many charts that use straight lines to connect points over time, and this it uses curvy lines, and the concavity of it, your eye hones in on the concavity of the line.
And it feels like it's swinging.
Yes.
Right? It feels like a state is swinging back and forth. It's not just a jutted, very specific knows where it's going path. Where is it going to end up? I don't know. Better keep scrolling, right? And so that's a good part of this overall achieving the narrative type of thing. Any last comments about this piece?
I did just notice that the thickness of the line in this case is size of lead. Is that right? Not electoral votes. There's like a switch at the top left.
Yes.
Between lead and votes.
That is correct.
Oh.
And so that what that does is it squeezes these all together, so you can kind of immediately see how a candidate stacks up against another candidate in terms of the width and the amount of electoral votes they won. And so, for example, you can see very clearly that Reagan won every single state except the District of Columbia and Minnesota by less than 1%, in fact, in '84. Which actually related to that, I think I want to highlight an outlier here and discuss how they handled it. DC. Not very swingy. And the way that they handled this is notice that these margins are consistently over 50%. Now, this axis here says greater than 50%. It doesn't continue to increment by 10% degrees. Why? It's an outlier. And yes, you're there.
Not enough space.
Yeah, not enough space. If we were to do that every 10%, then these in here would be squeezed together, right? Because we'd just have that much space to show this out here. And that outlier would ruin the rest of it, right? It's like when you have an outlier way too high on some graphs. And typically, you know, it's discouraged to do that with your axes in traditional graphs, but here it's pretty well justified. And it almost saves it to some degree. We have way more white space between these years. Awesome. So I want to look at one more piece, because you might be like, oh yeah, if I can make things interactive, they're always going to be good. And one, that's not right. There's a lot of things that we discussed about this that are very good, despite it being interactive, and how interactivity here is with intent. And secondly, you don't need to make something interactive for it to tell a story or be really convincing, okay? So the second thing that I want to show is also from 538, Ben Morris, the sports writer, at New 538 when ESPN bought it. And it is called Messy is Impossible. Okay, messy is impossible. And this piece I'm going to do one of my favorite expressions and call a Facebook read, where we're going to look at the pictures and ignore the text. Okay, so we just saw this in our newsfeed. We're like, oh, that's cool. I want to click that, but I don't want to read because who does that? So we're going along. Messy is impossible, whatever. All right, so we see this graph. Overall scoring production. Total goals and assists versus games played since 2010 World Cup. Here's Messi. Here's Ronaldo. Here's a bunch of dots for a bunch of other people. All right, that's cool. Messi seems to be good to some degree. Shooting efficiency versus shooting volume. In-play goal percentage versus shots per game. Weird and wonky, target at the audience, but still. Here we go. I see Messi's far from this trend line of sorts. I'm not really sure. Ronaldo's over here, and everyone else is here. To some degree, I see some type of outlier thing, but remember on Facebook reading, I want to keep going. Here's a table. This table demonstrates goals above average. Don't know what that is because I didn't read the text, but I see that Messi's 0.038, which is more than double 0.05. We'll return to this in a second, why we might think this is a graph instead of a given visualization. Goal percentage, just a cutesy little thing that frankly you could have built in Microsoft Paint by distance from goals. All players, the percentage of goals each of those players score from their respective zones. Pretty cool, pretty effective. Ronaldo, Messi, everyone else. Deadly from outside the penalty area. Goals scored versus shot attempts. So here I have Ronaldo, there's Messi, here's everyone else. Again, just this outlier far and above in terms of the number of shots he has relative to the number of goals he scores on those shots. We can keep on going, right? So Messi's good. Yep, got it. Great. Taking on defenders, 1-on-1 success rate versus attempts per game. Messi, Suarez, Ronaldo, everyone else. Dishing it versus taking it. So in other words, assists per game versus goals per game. Assists, goals, why not both? Messi, Ronaldo, everyone else. And we can keep on going. Okay, now to focus on what this does visually effectively, I want to zoom in on just one specific graph, and that's this one. This graph here, okay? So same exercise. What do we like about this visualization? Yeah.
Ronaldo is quantity, Messi is quality.
How did you get that from this visualization?
Takes a lot of shots.
Come on, we haven't even looked at it that long. How are you getting that?
I don't know.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time.
Okay,
like,
okay. Yeah. I just
yeah.
Whereas Ronaldo is just, I'm going to take it. It's like a ball hog, right? So I'm going to always take the shots. Messi's like, I'll take the shots. I'm calculated, and I'm going to make one of them.
Yeah, yeah. And my comment of deriding you was that was a joke because of how quickly you were able to come to that conclusion, right? And I think that there are features in this visualization that allow you to quickly, correctly come to that idea. What else do we like about this? What else?
Big red line.
Big red line. Why do you like that?
Lets you know what's good.
Yeah, yeah. So connected to that point, this is for a little bit of a statistically inclined audience to be thinking about what the regression of players and shots is going to be. But it helps come to the conclusion that you came to, that if someone just takes a bunch of shots, frankly, they're probably going to have more goals, right? Someone that's taking 10 shots has a higher chance of scoring another given shot versus someone that takes 1 shot, right? So this kind of debunks this idea, and Ronaldo the ball hog, kind of like that, is he takes a lot of shots, he has a lot of goals, but it's because he takes a lot of shots. You can almost argue that some of these unlabeled points here are more effective, or maybe at least more efficient on offense per shot than Ronaldo is. And Messi over here, just incredible number of goals on a comparatively few number of shots. So we like the trend line. What else do we like?
It puts the highlight squarely on Messi or Ronaldo and just ignores everybody else.
Yeah, immediately. Your eyes are drawn to the labeled points here, which the 2 labeled points are Messi and Ronaldo, the 2, maybe not outliers in this one, but outliers throughout the piece that have been contrasted.
It also shows how those 2 players stand out for most players.
Yeah. Yeah, it shows how consistently a lot of these visualizations highlight those that are the superstars. And, in sports, there's this debate about who's better between those 2 players. And so the idea that they're consistently highlighted and one of them's consistently better is notable. What else? What do we pay attention to the title? It's a very deliberate choice the way this is titled.
So he talks a little bit about from where he's making these shots, and it doesn't actually mention that on either of the axes. Like like the distance from goal or anything like that. It's just assumed that all of these shots, or at least the preponderance of these shots, are taken from outside of the penalty area.
Right.
Which adds to its incredible nature, right? So if you understand anything about soccer or football, outside of the penalty area is harder than inside the penalty area.
It's like a sniper, like a sniper shot. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other thing is I agree. The other thing is, notice that the title is the takeaway, and the subtitle is Axis 1 versus Axis 2. Very deliberate choice. I encourage you to mimic that in your medium write-ups. So it's like, hey, idiot, this is what you should be taking away here. This is what's actually in the graph, right? That's an editorial choice that I think we should mimic. It allows us to, remember, a graph is a way to visualize and demonstrate space to cause an immediate takeaway. If the title of the graph is what the takeaway should be, even if you fail to interpret the thing, the answer is right there for you, right? Don't make it hard. Tell immediately what the reader is supposed to take away, then the subtitle is Axis 1 versus Axis 2. Speaking of axes, what do we maybe like about the axes?
That's straightforward.
Straightforward, yeah.
And it's incremented correctly. So
Yeah.
it's like the Y is like every 5, and then the X is like every 50.
Yeah, yeah. So the two things. One is that they're very clearly labeled and interpretable. And the second is that there's no funny business. There's no gaps. There's no starting at a weird spot. And so to expand a bit on the idea that the axes are simple, let me just say the following. We know what a shot is, right? So it's pretty easy. It's intuitive. Must have kicked it at the goal. We know what a goal is as well. Must have gone in the goal, right? Which means all the viewer's attention is spent solely on thinking about the interaction of the two axes. Anytime a single axis requires your viewer to pause and be like, wait, what is that? What is that measuring? You've lost them. Because how are they going to be able to compare one axis that they don't even know what it is compared to a second axis? So in other words, your vectors should be immediately interpretable to your audience. And obviously that's relative. This is a pretty general piece. Most folks are familiar with what a goal is and what a shot is. So it's pretty good and generalizable. Those could be more complex things, just depending on the audience. The point is one vector in one direction, easily interpretable by itself, meaning the audience spends their energy, mental energy on the comparison between the two. And they're labeled. The axes are labeled. Cross your T's, dot your I's, right? Okay, so any last comments?
Especially for sports, you attention spans are probably, I'm going to assume people who watch a lot of sports with short attention spans. But if you're reading the New York Times or like maybe a statistical journal, you're gonna spend a lot of time making sure so you can have more complex. Let's say in a journal you can have more complex, axes. But for here you want to keep it kind of simple, so you can scroll. But if it takes too much for an average sports fan, you're probably gonna lose.
It's subtle, but messy is off the chart.
Yes, yes, it is. It is subtle. There isn't a label above messy.
Yeah.
Right? And so the axes thing, that is my conjecture for why this thing is not a graph. Because by this not being a graph, we miss out on recognizing that Messy's number is double that of the next closest, which is 0.16 here, or 0.16, excuse me. But goals above average, labeled on an axis, would leave a viewer wondering what that is. And so I think this is best off as a chart, and also probably a reason why we should read. So this kind of editorially, me hypothesizing editorially, is a good table instead of a graph, given the complex nature of the things it's measuring.
So I also think the sort choice is interesting because like it's been by default sorted in descending order of shots.
Yes.
Whereas the point he's really trying to make, and as in bold, is the goals above average. So like I would have expected that to be.
You're right. That is an interesting choice.
What are your thoughts about the amount of design effort that goes into something like this? Because it does depend on the audience, but you were doing a Facebook read, just scrolling through, trying to look for, I guess, what would appeal to you would be visuals or something familiar. Soccer and any sport is really have a lot of opportunity for great design work, or to put a graphic there to make it familiar to the audience.
Yeah.
So with the soccer audience looking at this, perhaps I was surprised to see that there's a lot of numbers and text, but not a lot of graphics or stuff that would just stand out.
Yeah.
538 really stays on brand, like their
Also
brand.
true.
And it's Washington, so people like
Yeah.
it's Washington, so people read maybe more.
Yeah. So I mean, the comments around what causes something to visually draw someone in, and what this
Well, I
does or
guess
does not do.
as an
good
editor
job.
of this, what draws the line on whether to introduce design, more design into this or less design?
Yeah,
So,
so I mean, that's of course going to be relative to the editorial standards that we have in place for 538. As noted, they have like a very specific branding standards, and in fact, I will show you the library you can use to produce 538 style graphs in Python. So you can just totally rip off and use the same editorial style. Yeah, it's cool. Takes like one line of code and everything's 538ized. So the point here is, I don't know, nor will I claim to know what exactly the line is, but I do know that each journal kind of sets their own standards, and for 538, they have a very specific set of colors and flashiness that they kind of permit across their pieces. Now, we could have a discussion about what is too much or what is too little, but I think that'll be a bit implicit when we can congeal all the insights we just had into specific actionable takeaways. So let me do that. So that was our examples. So I mean, visualization criteria just condense our learnings a little bit, right? So I mean, we had a very open dialogue about what made those powerful. Simplification, right? Only show what you need to have. There's such a tendency to do too much. Label a lot of things. We're data scientists. We want to give people way too much context over some of what we've found. I'm guilty of this all the time. It's tough for us to give just on-caveated visualizations. And so there is value to having simplification, and the way that we saw 538 compel and create a narrative out of those simplifications. So what does it mean to be simplified? That's just an adjective without a lot of actionable insight. That means your color use is deliberate, right? Did we notice how the regression line was red? Everything else was shaded and darkened. In the first piece, red and blue corresponds Republican Democrat used to American ideologies, right? And the second is there's strong contrast between the black and the white background. No extra color. Secondly, there's not distracting lines, okay? So the way that the axes are labeled, you know how if you ever make a chart, I like to make the joke that this causes your data to be locked up in prison. It's like you can have these insights, but they're not getting out for free. Delete them. Delete them out. They're not necessary. If you really need someone to like follow a specific grid line across your piece, there's probably a very niche specific reason, and only leave that one then, if that's the case. A lot of the times that's just too much. Remember, the thesis of visualization is using space to your advantage. Secondly, they're easy to interpret. Thanks. I want to make visualitions that are easy to interpret. What does that mean? That means that if you can't hand it to a colleague that is in your relative area of subject matter expertise and knowledge, whatever, and they can't walk away with a takeaway within 10 seconds of seeing it, maybe even 5 seconds, you failed. And you have to return and try again. The joke I made is that you came to a conclusion exceptionally fast about that visualization, and that proves that visualization did a good job. And so the insight that there's like this 5-second test where we can immediately see or not see if something has a specific point is valuable, okay? So keep that in mind. Does it pass the 10 or 30-second test? In person, I said 5, because I'm more generous when I'm writing, 10 or 30 seconds. Does the title tell you what you need to know, right? We talked about that. Clearly labeled. This is sort of like the cross the T's, dot the I's thing. Make sure that each axis is labeled. In independence, it's simple. That vector alone, shots is easily interpretable. Goals is easily interpretable. We only have to focus on the relationship between the two. Everything is labeled. Notice what is not here in the criteria of visualization. What is not listed here is interactivity. You do not need interactivity to have good visualizations. And to bring that point home, let me think about the following. Do you remember when color was recently introduced, or actually whenever it's introduced to a new package within any given language, what happens is people add color just because they can, right? Like people just print out and add color because we know how to. Or like I've seen documents from like when color printing came around and everything is just like color because like we can. And then now we've come back to an equilibrium where we're like, no, actually everything being colored doesn't make a lot of sense. We should use color deliberately. That's where we are on interactivity. Everyone's like, I can make it interactive, so I'm going to. No, interactivity for deliberate interactivity's sake.
does it mean that this ongoing complaint that we have that Medium doesn't embed the Tableau is actually a bit maybe superficial? Is that the...
I don't think so. So the concern is, so Medium doesn't allow the interactive Tableau dashboards. This doesn't mean interactivity is bad, or that's not a good thing to include. It just means that interactivity should be deliberate. Like, what is the same reason that you made blue Democrat, because that's a common American association. What is the interactivity adding? And if the answer is, well, it's interactive, you probably don't need it. Probably don't need it. Okay. Now, questions to ask yourself to achieve those principles. Who's my target audience? What do they know, like, already? And what do they need to know? How does your project fill in the gap? All right. You're working at a consulting agency. You can describe this in the following. Totally rip this. Yes. So can we just take a step back for a second and ask ourselves, this is what the client knows. This is what they need to know. What is the delta? How can we get that delta? And everyone will immediately listen. You'll make tons of money. Is that a question?
Yeah. So what would you recommend to do if you have a client that wants interactivity for the sake of interactivity?
Try to incorporate interactivity
In a
deliberately.
smart,
Yeah.
deliberately?
Yeah.
Like, that's hard when you're
Or I'd love to talk about this one-on-one to some degree. The level of subtleness. So this is related to a question that someone once asked, where they were like, my client really requires us to add subtitles to every single visualization we have in this given report, and like have captions on the visualizations, which makes sense, right? It gives you additional context. That's good. Though adding subtitles to visualizations gives us the temptation that the subtitle will explain the visualization, and suddenly we're not passing our 10-second test anymore. If we're relying on someone to read the subtitle, then they're not going to immediately have the takeaway from what that graph was. And so this person's like, so what does that mean? Do I just not include it and get fired and not have subtext? No. What that means is, well, maybe. No, what you do is you make the visualization without the caption, and then you add the caption back once you've already made that visualization. And guess what's going to happen? Someone's going to see that report, they're going to get the takeaway from the graph, and they're not going to read the subtitle anyway, right? And so you've achieved the exact same principles. My advice is similar. If you can, think about how interactivity doesn't necessarily distract, or how it could be a part or aid at a very minimum, maybe at a maximum. And I mean, we can talk specifically about it too. Okay, and then so how does my project affect this, and how can I make it better? Last quick note on comms tips. Central theses are good. Narrative arcs, SAR, situation, action, result. Delivery, criticize me, confidence stance, data humility, fill the room, talk about your mistakes, all that type of stuff.
I just wanted to add with clearly marking your chart or graph.
Yeah.
It's also, I find it to be really good to also, if you have the opportunity to list the data source onto your chart.
Yes.
Because a lot of times people want to know where you get your data from, and they don't want to read
That's a really good point.
the article. If you just have it on the chart, it makes it quickly for them to identify.
On 538, they do that, and I didn't call that out, and you're exactly right to do so. Bottom right hand corner, add a small thing, source, World Bank, source, whatever. Great call.
That pattern is like title, subtitle, graphic, source. That's become like basically the standard. I'm not sure who started it, but like a lot of them, I think 538.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Bravo, Words, they're all doing that.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's a good standard. All right, so no thing is complete without graph junk. So here's some graph junk. Sorry if you've seen this before. I don't have new graph junk yet. But here we go. If you don't know what graph junk is, you're about to learn. This is a pie chart, the world's most accurate pie chart. This is the sky. This is the light side of the pyramid, and this is the dark side of the pyramid. World's most accurate pie chart.
It's 3D. That's good.
It's. I should have added to that. No 3D. All right. The McDonald's curve. This says I'm loving it. This says never again. And this is time. So you're like, oh, I had it. That was great. And then an hour later, all around forward. This next pie chart is what helicopters do in movies. And this area here is labeled explode. All right. This is going to get a little edgy here. This is a diagram that was made during the campaign, and this says 83% of gun owners, and this says 90% of Americans, and then for some reason in the middle it says support universal background checks. And so someone replied on Twitter and wrote, people who know how to make Venn diagrams. And one of these days, someone's going to be in the audience and like, I was the one that made that asshole. But don't worry, it's a bipartisan problem. 50% is not that. These are both real. If you see bad examples, send them to me. Love to incorporate. Love to incorporate. Those were all real. Yeah, that was real. You can go find this. All the persistent lies. Okay, so open Q&A. Yeah, I'm all over Joseph of Iowa on everything.
Any chance we find you on the Slack sometime?
Sure.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions before we? Yeah.
I think I have a suggestion for you. I think your job, it requires you to use a customer. So you might have a really big customer, right? So I would create like a baseline graphic of what gives you the data, and then add layers of complexity or bigness until they please. You know, so like I would start with a very basic graph of like the information we need to get, and then just start like layers of fanciness. And if they're not satisfied with the first layer, you get a second layer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, because like sometimes you can have a really great graphic, but well, I want one.
Sometimes the less you talk to the client, the better. That is not advice.
I don't work with clients, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm assuming they're hard.
I agree.
Talking about that line of code for the tools.
Ah, yeah, you're right. Flavius called me out. So, line of code for the 538 tools. Yeah. Let me navigate. So, yeah, I can send this to Flavius on the Slack or somewhere. But there's open source. Well, I think it's somewhere. Here. All right, yeah. This, actually it's at the bottom here. This single line of code at the bottom, if you're familiar with Matplotlib, Python library for easily making graphs, there's a bunch of built-in styles. And plot.style.use, in quotes, 538. Everything is 538ized, and it's looks great, actually. It's literally like cheating. And so, I mean, you can go ahead and steal this whole thing for if you're new to Matplotlib and jump on in. It's pretty well commented and make some graphs.
And so to be deep in those who know how to handle terminal and line of code, those who don't. And so earlier you had a conversation about what tool would replace Tableau without having to pull the terminal and plug a code. And we mentioned quick site. Are there any other, for those who are non?
Tableau doesn't require code, actually.
Right, but that as alternative, open source alternative to Tableau, do you recommend to do simple graphs, interactive simple graphs?
I welcome crowdsourced suggestions. For infographics, I really like using Canva. It's a good tool. Free, tons of templates. Their whole thing is like look like a graphic designer without being one. They're non-interactive though, so it doesn't meet that criteria. As far as interactivity that doesn't require code, I think Tableau Public may be your best bet. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can get your Twitter.
Joseph of Iowa.
Of Iowa?
Yeah. That's my everything. You know my life. .com, LinkedIn, dangerous game. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll put the link to the Slack if you guys are not on the Slack.
Could someone please pass the game link?
Oh.
I know we're over time, so should I get going?
Yeah.
All right. So I've been asked to talk about the DACA issue, deferred action for childhood arrivals. I've been a lobbyist for 12 years. I use data to tell stories on the Hill, not in a data science way, just usually pretty basic, but data is so rarely used in advocacy. it can help a lot. So presenting an idea for what we could work on, and right off the bat, how many people are interested in the DACA issue, or at least follow it. All right, about a third of those here. That's pretty good. My startup, we take all the public advocacy data out there, put it in one platform, figure out who is really good at what, so any organization can quickly find and engage that person on that issue. So we have all these people that want to work on DACA issues, and then we've established an informal partnership with Forward.us. Does anyone know what that is? It's a Zuckerberg-backed immigration, pro-immigration group. They're now the number one group working on DACA issues. And so to start for Forward.us, we looked at all the data. We found 595 companies and nonprofits signed on to the Forward.us letter supporting reauthorization of the DACA program. Of those 595, 14 are actually following through and doing that and advocating for that. So about 2.35%. Not a good number if you're trying to have an impact on Capitol Hill. And in my opinion, it's one of the reasons why a lot of Republicans are shrugging their shoulders saying, yeah, we get called about it. People say they care, but do they really? And so the best case as of right now is that Democrats are able to force DACA to be part of reauthorization for the 2018 budget. It may be authorized for another year. It may not be. The problem then is in all these groups that are saying they care but not active, how do you push them to be active? How do you guilt trip them to be active? Or how do you get their employees to say internally, hey, you should actually use some resources to work on this? So that's the problem, and we have that data on all those companies, and we need to find a solution. So
you said that the Republicans don't really care.
So
I would think that the less they comment on DACA, the better. Because if they do comment like, hey, these are Americans just like us, to be honest, they're from red states. Are you defending immigrants? They're most likely Democratic voters. So I would think the less they comment, the better. If they do comment on the issue and they give their position, how they feel, most likely I would think anybody in a red state does not care too much about that, or at least keeping it. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, but by care, I mean the majority of Republicans have chosen, and their Republican leadership have chosen to make it their policy position to not include DACA in their 1 month extension. So as of today, they said we will not be reauthorizing DACA.
So how can we help? What would you ask?
So at this point, we need a few people who want to look at the data with us and figure out what trends there may be. For example, we have a lot of tech companies that signed up, figuring out if they are in areas where they would have more DACA families, and then send that to them. That's one idea. We put out one story so far on this. It didn't get much coverage. And any other ideas from people?
Sorry, so could you describe a little bit more about the DACA data set? Like where are you getting from, what kind of data it is?
So there are open letters that Forward.us puts together of every company that says they support the DACA program.
Okay.
Are you using text analysis to look at those letters?
Yeah.
Okay.
Raw text and then matching and filtering out any dupes. And then we have 18 years of data showing every group that's been active at the federal level, and we're able to see who is currently active in the last 4 quarters.
Group, you mean the companies, the lobbying, or the companies and who they're funding in terms of campaign contributions?
That's another data source we can look at, who they've given to, or who has given from within their company. This core data source is just who's active lobbying and advocating on DACA issues on Capitol Hill.
In the data set, the one that I looked at, I think it's on the Congress disclosure sort of policy, and you find this data in PDFs. some of the companies, they reflect that they lobby through immigration category, but they do not specify if that's DACA or not. How do you come to the conclusion that they do participate in support of DACA?
So there's 79 categories in the data. One is immigration, and then there's a separate field where they have to describe what within that category they're working on. Right. Yeah, we identify bill numbers and if they write out in plain text.
So when you have this list, do you invite people to assist or to participate? What specifically would you expect these people to be doing?
That part's open-ended. We're at a point where we want ideas about what trends we should be looking at, or what might influence some of these groups to be more active. Yes.
Just in terms of an idea of partnering with another kind of similar, heard of the Sunlight Foundation?
Yep.
They will have like maybe a lot of complementary data.
They got shut down last year, and
Yeah, they're gone. They sold their last year for public.
yeah, they merged.
Not foundation.
Right. So they have a few people left, but my understanding is they're mostly gone. Unfortunately. I know. So I don't want to keep everyone longer. We have a Slack channel if anyone is interested in.
We create a channel for that set of data, and that will be the lead, and we can continue the conversation on Slack under that channel. Thank you.
John Harsh. John, yeah.
And I put it on the, sorry if it's not French writing, but here you get the Slack access by going to that Google link. Well, thank you guys. I said, anyone want to say anything? Thank you for coming, and John and all the speakers. Thanks, Joseph. Sorry, and John, Ellie, and all the speakers. Thank you. There's more Yingling and another bottle of wine left.
I have a good question, sir. For you people, like I'm not a data analyst. A lot of you people look like statistics.
Yeah.
I have a math background, but not statistics. How do we get more involved and find what tools we should be using?
I think by stalking the speakers to and asking them that there's a question of, for example, I am in your case in the sense that if I understand your point correctly, that the least code I need to use, the better I am. And
I'm just going to get into data analysis.
Right. And learn Tableau at the World Bank, and so that's my baseline. Is like anything that's as easy as Tableau to learn. So I would encourage you on Slack and in fact with channel it's called Data Tools, and people plug the recommendations. So I would certainly actively ask and suggest, and during the meetup, and then continue offline on Slack. Absolutely.
There's also a group called the Washington Statistical Society, and they're online. It's fairly accessible to find them, and they have lots of events like the ones I talked about today, and they have events specific on statistics. Not too much of programming, maybe a little bit, but more on the statistical side of stuff, like interpreting.
But for example, I had no idea about QuickSight, and I know I'm gonna check that because it's exactly this kind of tools that I've been looking at, and yeah. Yeah, but not everyone can take the 3 months that are science. Sorry?
The Slack channel only to DC?
No, it's anyone. Yeah.
One more update that if you have any ideas, if you have data sets that you want to explore, bring ideas to, you will have a chance to pitch any future events.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of abandoned.
Make it perfect. The idea of this components of that.
We submit the announcement, or you can do it.
I mean, I'll go there.
one of your findings.
And if I'm having trouble with that, I'll email you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I might have tomorrow workshop.
Great.
I'll talk to you.
I would love to. When you see again, everyone's like, whoa, I want to make you skip your own times. Yeah, yeah. The paper that we were discussing about archiving, just